Sign it now, Naomi. My husband kept smiling for the waiter, but under the table his fingers were digging into my wrist hard enough to leave crescent marks. Across from us, my foster brother lifted his bourbon and said, almost lazily, "Either you transfer emergency authority tonight, or your father's company dies by Monday." Then a busboy I had never seen in my life stopped beside my chair, slid a black velvet ring box onto my lap, and whispered, "Do not drink anything else. Do not sign. If you sleep in that house tonight, you will not wake up as yourself. Stay with me, and tell me below. Husband, brother, or nobody, who would you trust?" The ring box felt wrong the second it touched my palm. Too heavy for jewelry. Too deliberate. My pulse kicked so hard it blurred the edges of the candlelight and the skyline beyond the glass walls of the restaurant. We were 42 floors above downtown Chicago. The river below us black and glossy as spilled oil. The whole city glittering like a lie people had agreed to repeat until it sounded like hope. I did not open the box right away. I smiled. That was the first smart thing I did all night. Graham leaned back in his chair, his expression soft and practiced. The expression that had fooled donors, bankers, and mothers in grocery stores for most of his life. He had one of those handsome faces that seemed built for apology, all clean edges and tired blue eyes. The kind of face women trusted because it always looked like it had just come through something difficult with dignity. He had used that face on me for 7 years. "Naomi," he said gently, "I know you hate this side of the business. I know what your dad wanted. But Keller Biologics is bleeding cash, and if we don't consolidate control tonight, the board will splinter by morning." My foster brother, Micah Doon, let out a humorless little laugh. "You can volunteer your life away at free clinics all you want, but payroll hits in 3 days. Trucks roll in 5 states. This isn't a feelings problem. This is math." Math. That word landed like an insult, because both of them knew exactly what it touched in me. For 10 years I had worked as an emergency room nurse on the South Side. I knew trauma, timing, triage, lies, shock, blood loss, the smell of panic on a person's breath. What I did not know, or rather what everyone around me liked to pretend I did not know, was corporate language. My father had built Keller Biologics from 2 refrigerated vans and a rented warehouse into a regional cold chain company that specialized in transporting temperature-sensitive medicine between manufacturers, hospitals, and research labs. Not glamorous, not flashy, but essential. If insulin, blood products, trial medication, pediatric vaccines, or certain cancer drugs arrived warm, they arrived useless. My father used to say we didn't ship boxes, we shipped the margin between life and death. Then he died on the Eisenhower 3 months ago when a semi crossed the median in freezing rain. Just like that, I inherited 51% of a company I never expected to run. Just like that, my husband became patient. Just like that, Micah became helpful. Micah had lived with us from age 14 to 19 after my father took him in from one of the ugliest foster placements in Cook County. He had not been legally adopted, but in every way that mattered, he was family. At least that was the word I had used. My father had trained him in operations. I had defended him in every room where people described him as volatile, proud, difficult, too hungry. Micah became head of logistics by 33 and wore expensive watches with the aggression of a man who remembered exactly what it felt like not to own socks. My father trusted him. I trusted him because my father did. That is how good traps are built, not with ropes, with borrowed trust. The waiter poured wine. Graham nudged my glass toward me. "Baby," he murmured. "Drink. You look pale." I looked down at the ring box in my lap and finally opened it beneath the table. Inside was not a ring. It was a flash drive, a paper packet folded into a square, and a tiny sealed strip from an over-the-counter drug test kit. My mouth went dry. I kept my face still. On the paper, in cramped block letters, someone had written, "Check your night tea. Watch Michelson Warehouse. Trust the temperature logs. Not your husband." Michelson Warehouse was a decommissioned storage facility Keller Biologics had supposedly stopped using last year. I folded the note shut so carefully it felt like handling a live wire. Graham was still watching me. Not openly. Graham never stared. He observed the way polished men do, using concern as camouflage. "What is it?" he asked. I looked up, gave him a little laugh, and held up the menu. "Nothing. Dessert list. I'm deciding whether to be responsible or self-destructive." Micah snorted. "For once, pick self-destructive." The busboy who had given me the box was gone. Maybe he had been a busboy. Maybe he had not. Everything after that slowed down the way it does in the trauma bay when one alarm starts, then another. And your body understands before your thoughts do, that the next 5 minutes will decide everything. Graham slid a leather folder toward me. "It's not a sale," he said. "It's temporary emergency authority, 90 days, so I can stabilize vendor relationships, restructure debt, and keep the company from being gutted by opportunists." "You mean so you can sign in my place?" I said. "So the company survives." Micah leaned forward, elbows on the white tablecloth. Naomi, you've postponed this 3 times. You don't answer the board fast enough. You don't know which contracts matter. And every day you hesitate, people smell weakness. There are predators in this industry. The thing about being underestimated is that sometimes it tempts you into helping people underestimate you. It saves energy. It keeps rooms calm. It lets arrogant men expose themselves 1 sentence at a time. So I looked down at the papers as if intimidated. In reality, I was reading the edges, wrong font on one writer, revised article numbers inconsistent with our standard legal format, a section adding signatory authority over subsidiary storage sites, another section broadening access to internal audits, a clause allowing disposition of underperforming physical assets with only executive notification, not board approval. If I signed this, Graham would not just steady the company. He would own its throat. I lifted my pen. Graham's eyes warmed. Before I do this, I said softly, I want to ask one question. Anything. Why did my dad remove Michelson from the active route map 6 months before he died? Micah went still. Only for half a second. But in a tense room, half a second is a confession. Graham recovered first. Because it was inefficient. Naomi, come on. That's weird, I said. Because our old warehouse manager told me Michelson was still drawing utility overages in February. Micah's jaw tightened. Who told you that? There it was. Not confusion, not denial. Anger at leakage. I set the pen down. So it is still active. Graham smiled again, but the softness was gone around his mouth. No. It means someone is billing incorrectly and we'll fix it tomorrow. Sign the papers. The waiter arrived with dessert and set a flourless chocolate cake in front of me, along with a fresh cup of chamomile tea I had not ordered. I looked at the pale gold liquid steaming beside my plate. Check your night tea. My skin prickled under my dress. Graham's voice dropped lower. Drink before it cools. I lifted the cup, brought it near my lips, and in the reflection on the spoon I saw Micah watching my hand, not my face. I tipped the cup just enough to wet my mouth, then set it down. Happy? I asked. No, Micah said. Sign. My phone buzzed in my purse. Unknown number. 1 image attachment. I opened it below the table. It was a photograph of my kitchen at home taken through the back window less than an hour earlier. On the counter beside the tea kettle sat the ceramic jar where I kept my chamomile sachets. A man's hand wearing Graham's wedding band was dropping a white tablet into a mug. My entire body went cold, but cold in a focused way. Hospital cold. Decision cold. I typed one reply. Who are you? The response came instantly. Someone your father paid to notice things. Do not go home alone. I locked the phone and looked up into the face of the man I had slept beside for 7 years. He was saying something about liquidity now, about bridge financing, about market confidence, but every word sounded distant under the roar in my ears. He had drugged me before. That was the only explanation for the fog that had wrapped itself around my evenings these past 6 weeks. The headaches, the drifting memory, the strange heaviness after tea, the mornings when I woke and could not quite remember whether I had answered certain emails or merely dreamed I had. My primary care doctor had blamed stress and grief. I had believed her because grief is such a convenient costume for almost any symptom. I signed my name, not on the transfer form, on the dessert receipt. Then I slid the legal packet back across the table and said, I want to review it with counsel in the morning. Micah's chair scraped against the floor. No. A couple at the next table turned. Graham put a hand on Micah's sleeve. Sit down. Micah stayed half risen, eyes fixed on me with a heat that stripped 10 years off him. For one ugly second I saw the boy he had once been in our backyard at 16, bleeding from the mouth after a fight, looking at the world like it had personally insulted him. Back then my father had called him wounded. I had called him loyal, standing there in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. He looked like a man one bad answer away from violence. Then he sat. That scared me more. Violent men who remember the room are more dangerous than violent men who lose it. Graham exhaled and gave the neighboring table an embarrassed smile. My brother-in-law is passionate. Naomi, sweetheart, I understand. Review it, but let me drive you home. No, I said too quickly, then softened. I want air. I'll take my own car. He tilted his head. At least let Micah follow you. I said I want air. Silence again. Then Graham nodded. Fine. Text me when you get in. He kissed my cheek. His lips were warm. My skin crawled. I got up, tucked the box into my clutch, and walked to the elevator on legs that felt detached from my body. I did not go to the garage. I went to the restroom, locked myself into a stall, and finally let my hands shake. The flash drive sat in my palm like a tiny black tooth. I plugged it into my phone with an adapter I kept in my bag because nurses become women who carry strange tools. The drive held only 4 files. One was labeled Night Routen. One was labeled Templog MW. One was labeled Dad. One was labeled If you open this, They know you suspect. I opened night routine first. A grainy time-stamped video appeared. My kitchen. 3 nights ago. Graham entering at 10:40, 1 p.m., opening the ceramic tea jar, dissolving something into the mug he always brought me after I showered. Then standing there in the dark, waiting, not moving, like a man tending to a ritual. I bit down on my knuckles so hard I tasted blood. The second file was a spreadsheet of temperature logs from Michelson Warehouse, showing incoming and outgoing pallets tagged as insulin, monoclonal antibodies, pediatric oncology drugs. Several entries were flagged red. Storage variants. Relabeled batch numbers. Duplicate lot IDs. Product disappearance without documented destruction. If this was real, someone was swapping legitimate medicine for counterfeits or diluted stock somewhere in the chain. My father had built a company around trust so strict he once fired a regional manager for leaving vaccine coolers open too long during a lunch break. If this was happening under our name, it was not ordinary theft. It was murder dressed as inventory. The DAD file contained an audio clip. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the stall, hoarse and tired and unmistakable. If anything happens to me before the March audit, Naomi does not sign anything for Graham Mercer or Micah Doon. Not one thing. Michelson is dirty. Somebody is using our cold lanes to wash counterfeit product. I should have seen it sooner. If this recording reaches her, tell her I'm sorry. I thought I had time to fix it clean. I stopped breathing. The recording ended with a car horn and the sound of him saying, faintly, "Call me back when you get the plate." That audio changed the shape of my grief in a single brutal second. My father had not died still trusting the people around me. He had died scared, and he had tried to warn me. My phone vibrated again. Unknown. Exit through hotel kitchen. Black SUV in garage level. 2 is waiting for you. Not your car. They moved it. That was the moment the situation stopped being a marital betrayal and became a live threat. I flushed the toilet for cover, stepped out, washed my hands because bodies like routine when minds don't, and studied my own face in the mirror. 36. Dark hair pulled into a low knot. Green dress chosen by Graham because he said it made me look expensive. Eyes too bright, mouth too still. I thought of all the patients I had seen in the ER who understood too late that the danger had started long before the blood. Then I walked out of the restroom smiling like a woman about to call a friend. The hallway to the kitchen required confidence more than permission. Restaurants at that level rely on people believing they belong. I had spent enough years in hospitals to mimic institutional purpose. Chin up, phone to ear, brisk turn at the service corridor. A cook looked up. I said, "I'm so sorry. My husband's having a diabetic episode and your host sent me this way." No one stops a woman who says diabetic episode in the right tone. I reached the loading alley behind the restaurant 2 minutes later. Wind hit me hard enough to make my eyes water. A city truck hissed by. Somewhere metal slammed. A man stepped from the shadow beside the grease bins. I had already grabbed the pepper spray in my purse when he lifted both hands and said, "Miss Keller, don't. Your father would hate that ending." He was in his 60s, narrow as a fence post, with a knit cap pulled low and a tan maintenance jacket zipped to the throat. I recognized him and did not recognize him at the same time. He had worked for us years ago, not in logistics. Compliance. Then disappeared. "Eddie Vale," I said. He nodded once. "Used to be. Why are you here?" "Because I owed your dad. And because I don't like men who poison women to make paperwork easier." "Are you the one sending me those messages?" "Yes." "Why now?" "Because tonight they expected your signature. And when men like that don't get what they expect, the next move gets uglier." A black sedan rolled past the alley, opening too slowly. Eddie did not look at it. "Walk with me," he said. "Not fast. Tell me my father's crash wasn't an accident." He looked at me then, and the pity in his face almost dropped me to my knees. "I can tell you he hired me back off the books 2 weeks before he died because he thought internal leakage had turned into organized theft. I can tell you Michelson should have been shut down and wasn't. I can tell you your husband started spending cash like a man who expected a very different future. And I can tell you the truck that crossed the median had a driver whose logs vanished before state police could reconcile the route. That's not enough. It's enough to keep you alive until we get more." We crossed under the EL tracks. My phone lit up with 6 missed calls from Graham, 3 from Micah. I muted it. Eddie led me into an all-night pharmacy 2 blocks away and toward the Minute Clinic waiting area. Bright lights. Cameras. Witnesses. Smart. He bought me bottled water and said, "Spit." "What?" "Tea residue. If it touched your mouth, give me what you've got." I swished water, spit into the sample cup he bought for a home test kit, and watched my life become evidence. "My car," I said. "They moved it from valet. My guess is to make you accept a ride." "How do you know all this?" "Because for 6 weeks I've been paying 3 separate people for information, and I'm running out of money and patience." He slid a burner phone across the little plastic table. Use this. Your regular phone is compromised if Graham set up your accounts the way I think he did. We go to one place tonight and one place only. Police. Not yet. I stared at him. Not yet? Your husband has a board ally, 2 vendors who owe him, 1 consultant who used to work federal procurement, and at least 1 cop on a holiday charity committee he donates to. I'm not saying the whole city is rotten. I'm saying if you walk in scared and vague, you'll get sent home to your husband with advice to rest. He was right, and I hated him for it. So where do we go? To somebody who can hold information without getting bought before sunrise. That somebody turned out to be my father's former outside counsel, Celia Renner, who lived in a brick townhouse in Old Town full of framed trial sketches and expensive lamps. She opened the door at 12:18 a.m., in silk pajamas, and did not ask why I was there, until after she had deadbolted us in, put a glass of water in my hand, and looked at the bruise on my wrist. Then she said very quietly, "Tell me everything. Start with what he had you drink." I told her, not elegantly, not in order, but enough. The ring box, the footage, the flash drive, my father's message, the tea, the pressure to sign, Michelson, the logs, my foggy evenings, Eddie, the moved car. Celia did not interrupt once. When I finished, she asked, "Did you sign anything?" "No." "Good." She turned to Eddie. "Chain of custody?" He laid the flash drive and cup on her dining table, messy but salvageable. Celia nodded. "Naomi, from this moment on you do not answer your husband emotionally, strategically, or in person unless I tell you to. You answer him as though you are overwhelmed but compliant. We buy time until dawn. Then we test your blood, secure your home, preserve your devices, and lock down corporate access before the morning market opens." I sat there staring at her. "You believe me that fast?" Celia's expression hardened. "Your father asked me, in writing, to prepare an emergency governance packet to prevent precisely this scenario. He never filed it because he said he needed 1 more week to be certain who was involved. Then he died. My lungs forgot how to work." "You knew?" "I knew he was afraid. I did not know he was right." She leaned closer. "Naomi, listen to me carefully. These men are not trying to win an argument. They are trying to gain uncontested control over a pharmaceutical transport corridor with enough legal cover to survive an audit. You are not a wife in a rough marriage tonight. You are the controlling shareholder standing in front of a criminal revenue stream." That sentence changed me, not healed me, not steadied me, changed me. It put shape around the terror. Around 2 in the morning, Celia's investigator arrived, a former postal inspector named Tessa Bird with close-cropped hair and a face that looked made for bad news. She took my phone, photographed the bruise on my wrist, bagged the ring box, cloned the flash drive, and asked me questions in a voice so calm it made my own answers sound almost sane. At 3:10 a.m., a mobile phlebotomist drew blood in Celia's kitchen under sealed documentation. At 3:45 a.m., Tessa logged into our corporate system through a back-end administrative path my father had apparently maintained for catastrophe scenarios. The temperature discrepancies at Michelson were worse than the spreadsheet suggested. Certain lot numbers repeated across different hospitals. Some shipments left on our trucks and arrived in systems that later reported failed efficacy or mysterious inventory recalls. Nothing conclusive by itself. Together, ugly. At 4:20 a.m., Celia played my father's audio message again. This time I listened to the spaces between his words. He sounded tired, yes, but not confused, not reckless, focused. The way he sounded when a freezer alarm went off at 2 a.m., and he was already pulling on boots before the rest of us understood the scale of the problem. At 4:27 a.m., Graham texted, "Where are you?" At 4:31 a.m., "Naomi, I'm worried sick." At 4:33 a.m., "If this is about the paperwork, we can talk tomorrow." At 4:36 a.m., "Micah is spiraling. Please answer." At 4:40 a.m., "Don't do something dramatic because you're grieving." There it was. The first pivot. Concern into diagnosis. Celia read that one over my shoulder and said, "Keep it simple." I typed. "Stayed with a friend. Felt sick after dinner. Need sleep. We'll talk later." He responded in 9 seconds. "Come home. I'll take care of you." I turned the phone face down. "No," I said aloud. Celia nodded. "Good." By sunrise we had a plan. Step 1. I would check into a private medical unit under a different last name for observation and toxicology follow-up. Not because I was falling apart, but because proof matters. Step 2. Celia would file a temporary corporate action freezing non-essential asset movement, requiring dual authorization for warehouse-level inventory transfers, and suspending discretionary access to inactive storage sites pending a surprise compliance review. Step 3. Tessa and Eddie would get inside Michelson before word of the freeze spread. Step 4. I would act hurt, not hostile. Confused, not armed. Men like Graham and Micah prepared for resistance. They did not prepare as well for delay. At 8:05 a.m., while I sat in a private clinic room giving urine samples and answering questions about medication I had never knowingly taken, Graham posted on our company intranet. In light of Naomi's continued grief-related health strain, I will be assisting with executive stabilization today. Assisting. He was already moving. Celia moved faster. By 8:22, she had filed the freeze and copied the board. By 8:37, Micah called 8 times. By 8:50, an internal email leak reached me through Tessa, showing Micah had tried to reroute 2 outgoing pallets from our Cicero hub to Michelson and been blocked. At 9:03, my toxicology prelims came back. Low-dose sedative compounds, repeated exposure pattern consistent with ongoing administration. The doctor looked up from the screen and said, "Miss Keller, this is not accidental." I laughed when she said it, not because it was funny, because sometimes the body, when handed proof of betrayal, makes a sound it would never make for ordinary pain. By noon, Tessa called from Michelson. "You need speaker," she said. I put her on. Wind. Hollow metal acoustics. Then her voice. "The facility is active under a shell vendor called Lake Meridian Fulfillment. Refrigeration is on. Half the cameras are dummy housings. We found relabeling stations, destroyed lot seals, industrial printers, and mixed inventories from at least 6 manufacturers. Some real, some counterfeit, some diluted, some maybe expired and reintroduced. This place is a slaughterhouse with clipboards." My throat closed. Eddie came on next. "Found a room upstairs with paper records they didn't burn. And Naomi? There's a lockbox with your digital signature templates." My what? Scanned signatures, old board docs, driver authorization forms. Enough to clone your approvals clean. I looked at Celia. Her face had gone flat in the way lawyers reserve for moments when outrage becomes practical. "Get out," she said into the phone. "Photograph everything, touch as little as possible, we're escalating." That afternoon we did go to law enforcement, but not with a frightened wife's story and a shaky screenshot. We went with toxicology, audio, warehouse images, falsified records, access logs, and a sworn statement from me that my signature authority had been targeted. The meeting took place in a federal building conference room, so bland it made evil feel even more obscene. 2 agents. 1 prosecutor. 1 health fraud specialist, who looked like she had not smiled in years, and perhaps had no reason to. They listened. They asked short questions. They did not flinch. When the prosecutor heard what Keller Biologics carried in its legitimate lanes, she said, "If counterfeit oncology stock was inserted into those channels, we are no longer talking about theft with a pharmaceutical flavor. We are talking about patient endangerment at scale." At 9:00 p.m., they asked whether Graham and Micah knew I had gone to authorities. "Not yet," Celia said. "And it would be nice if it stayed that way." The prosecutor looked at me. "Can you still act?" I said yes before fear got a vote. That night, Graham left me 19 voicemails. Some were tender. Some were hurt. One sounded angry enough that he hung up before words became evidence. Micah sent only 1 text. "Stop making this uglier than it has to be." That is the kind of line men use when they are already standing ankle-deep in what they built. The next 48 hours were the strangest of my life. Everything was motion, but most of it invisible. Warrants moved quietly. Data preservation orders went out. Certain shipments were intercepted without public disruption. Hospitals were contacted in ways designed not to ignite panic before legitimacy could be verified. Board members who had ignored my questions suddenly became very responsive when federal language entered the room. And through all of it, I had to play almost normal. I told Graham I was staying under observation because I had a stress reaction after dinner. He came to the clinic once with flowers, and a face arranged into devastated devotion. I watched him through the glass before letting him in. There is something almost unbearable about seeing a person you used to love wearing the costume that once worked on you. He sat beside my bed, took my hand, and whispered, "Baby, you scared me." The monitors behind me beeped softly. My toxicology report was in a sealed file 10 feet away. He had no idea. "Did I?" I asked. "You vanished. You left me with Micah melting down, the board in chaos, vendors calling every minute. I thought maybe..." He swallowed. I thought grief had finally broken something. There it was again. Not what I felt. What he needed me to appear to be. I looked at him and tried to find the exact second our marriage had turned into a logistics problem for him. I could not. Maybe that is what breaks people most. Not the betrayal itself, but the realization that there was no dramatic turning point. Only a long, unnoticed erosion. "You've been putting things in my tea," I said. Just like that. No warning. He froze. It lasted maybe a heartbeat. Then he exhaled and squeezed my hand. "Naomi, what?" "You heard me." "Jesus." He looked wounded. Almost offended. "Is that what this is? Are you serious right now?" "Yes." "From who, Micah?" "Somebody at the company is filling your head because they know you're vulnerable." He leaned in. "Listen to me. You're exhausted. You're not sleeping. You've had panic episodes since your dad died." I slapped him. Not hard enough to satisfy anything. Hard enough to stop the sentence. His face turned. The room went silent except for the monitor. I had never hit anyone in my adult life. He stared at me with pure disbelief, one hand on his cheek. Then his eyes changed. Not softer, not harsher. Emptier. The mask dropped. Only for a second. But 1 second is enough to meet the real man. He stood. "I'm trying very hard," he said, voice now almost expressionless. "To be compassionate about what you're becoming." What you're becoming. Not what he had done. What I was becoming in response. He set the flowers down and walked out without touching me again. When the door closed, the FBI agent stationed discreetly in the hall stepped in and said, "You okay?" I started laughing and crying at the same time so hard I had to put my face in both hands. The next morning brought the first clean break in the case. A mid-level inventory analyst named Priya Sethi came forward through counsel, after seeing the internal freeze and hearing whispers of federal presence. She had been pressured for months to reconcile impossible batch records. When she objected, Micah removed her from final audit review, and Graham assured her the variance related to an insurance-sensitive relabel operation. She had copied everything before they locked her out. Her files linked the counterfeit stream directly to Lake Meridian. Michelson, 2 corrupt vendor managers, and 3 executive authorizations routed through Graham's office credentials. Not enough yet for my father's death. Enough for the present machine. That should have made me feel safer. It did not, because cornered men accelerate. On the third night, while I was still under private security observation, the nurse on duty brought in tea I had not ordered. I smelled bitter almond before the cup hit the tray. Not cyanide, not like television, just wrong. I looked up at the nurse. She was not my nurse. Her badge sat crooked. Her shoes were too clean. Her hands did not belong to someone 12 hours into a hospital shift. She smiled. A tiny, polite smile. And in that second, every instinct I had built over 10 years in emergency medicine lit up at once. I overturned the tray into her. Hot water exploded across her scrubs. She cursed too low, too male in cadence, and bolted for the door. Security got him in the hallway. Him, not her. A wig came off in one hand. The badge was fake. The scrubs belonged to stolen hospital laundry. They found a syringe in his sock. After that, the case moved from white-collar rot to immediate threat on my person. And nobody needed convincing anymore. Graham stopped calling. Micah started disappearing from known addresses. Searches widened. Warrants multiplied. Board panic became open warfare. One longtime director resigned before anyone formally accused him, which told us more than his lawyer ever would. And still, there was one question burning under all the rest. My father. 3 days later, we got an answer ugly enough to make the room go quiet. Eddie had traced a maintenance subcontractor who serviced a fleet camera on one of our leased support vans. The man drank too much, gambled badly, and suddenly had 40 grand in cash deposits the week my father died. When agents leaned on him, he folded fast. He admitted he had been paid to swap route transponders and obscure a camera chain, not to cause a crash, he insisted, just to make certain movements impossible to reconstruct cleanly afterward. He named one of Micah's off-book dispatch contacts. Not proof that they had ordered a murder. Proof that someone expected my father's last day to need obscuring. I sat with that for a long time. People think revenge arrives hot. Sometimes it arrives cold and methodical, because grief has already burned through the part of you that would waste motion. Celia wanted me out of sight through the takedowns. The prosecutor wanted me available. The agents wanted me nowhere near any of it. I wanted one thing only, to look both of them in the eye when it ended. What I got was something better. The board emergency session. It had originally been scheduled by Graham to force interim control through a crisis narrative built around my instability, shipment disruptions, and urgent continuity concerns. Once the warrants were in place, law enforcement could have picked him up at home. But the prosecutor saw the value in letting the network converge in one room around a familiar lie. So the meeting stayed on the calendar. Friday, 10:00 a.m. Executive Conference Suite, Keller Biologics headquarters. I arrived at 9, 54 inches a navy suit that made me look, according to Celia, like the widow of a senator who knows where everybody is buried. My hair was sleek, my makeup was minimal, my hands were steady, The boardroom smelled like coffee, leather, and fear. Graham was already there, speaking in low tones to two directors. He turned when I entered, and for a moment genuine shock crossed his face before discipline flattened it. Micah stood near the windows, broader than I remembered, jaw dark with stubble, rage coming off him like heat over asphalt. No one knew who else in the room was wired. No one knew which security officer in the hall was ours. I took my seat at the head of the table. "This meeting is called to order," I said. Graham smiled thinly. "Naomi, are you sure you're up for this?" "I'm better than I've been in weeks." Micah barked a laugh. "That'd be a first." I looked at him. Careful. The room tensed. One director, Howard Bale, cleared his throat. "Given the disruption to operations and concern over Miss Keller's recent medical event, perhaps we should proceed directly to the continuity proposal." Graham slid packets down the table. "As discussed, temporary executive authority." "No," I said. He stopped. "Actually," I continued, "we're proceeding directly to the compliance matter." Graham's eyes flicked to Celia, who sat 3 chairs down with a closed folder, and the expression of a woman waiting for prey to commit to the open field. "I'm not sure what you mean," Graham said. "Yes, you are." I pressed a remote. The screen at the end of the room lit up. First image, Michelson warehouse interior, relabeling tables, destroyed packaging, temperature deviations, time-stamped, clear. Second image, a close-up of digital signature templates in a lockbox. Third, still frame from my kitchen, Graham dropping a tablet into my mug. The sound in the room changed, not louder, thinner. Howard Bale went white. Micah moved first, not toward the door, but toward me. 2 agents stepped in from the side wall so fast half the board gasped aloud. They had been in the room the whole time, disguised as security advisors. Micah stopped. Graham did not move at all. I played my father's audio. "If anything happens to me before the March audit, Naomi does not sign anything for Graham Mercer or Micah Doon. Not one thing. Michelson is dirty." By the time the recording ended, nobody was pretending this was about continuity anymore. Graham spoke very carefully. "This is theater." "No," Celia said. "This is evidence." The prosecutor entered then with federal badges behind her, and the room finally broke. One director started swearing. Another demanded counsel. Howard Bale tried to stand and nearly sat back down by accident. Micah looked at Graham the way men do when they realize the plan they thought made them partners is about to choose only one of them to survive. The prosecutor began reading charges: conspiracy, healthcare fraud, wire fraud, evidence tampering, attempted criminal poisoning, interference with regulated pharmaceutical distribution, additional counts pending. When she reached Graham, he turned to me. Not to his attorney, not to the agents. To me. "You really think you understand any of this?" he asked quietly. I held his gaze. "Enough to bury you." He gave the smallest shake of his head, almost sad. "I loved you." "No," I said. "You studied me." That hit harder than handcuffs. I could see it. Micah, meanwhile, had no interest in elegance. "Don't look at me like that," he snapped at me as agents moved closer. "You think your father built all this clean? You think hospitals don't squeeze? Insurers don't squeeze? Everybody takes. Everybody cuts. We just got smarter." "No," I said. "You got hungry enough to call murder efficiency." His face twisted. He was never going to give me a real share. The words hung there. Not "I'm innocent." Not "this is a mistake." He was never going to give me what I wanted. My father had spent 19 years trying to turn a wounded boy into a trusted man. Maybe he succeeded halfway. Halfway is all some predators need. As agents cuffed him, Micah jerked once and shouted, "You think this ends with us? Check the hospitals. Check every damn one of them. You'll see how the whole machine eats." The prosecutor's expression did not change, but she nodded to another agent. That outburst bought us 3 more search targets before lunch. Graham did not resist. Of course he didn't. Men like him resist on paper. As he passed behind my chair, he paused and said without looking at me, "You'll never run this company." I turned slightly. "Watch me." Then he was gone. You would think that was the climax. It wasn't. Arrests and the illusion of control. They do not end consequences. The next 6 weeks were hell in a better suit. We had to identify every compromised shipment lane, work with regulators, notify partner institutions, isolate suspect product, cooperate with emergency replacement logistics, and keep the legitimate bones of Keller Biologics from collapsing under the weight of what had been hidden inside it. Reporters circled. Competitors leaked whispers. One investor called me emotionally adjacent to the contamination on live television, and I learned I was capable of a kind of fury that improves diction. I moved into my father's townhouse alone because I refused to spend one more night in the brownstone Graham had decorated into a showroom version of our marriage. I stripped the kitchen jars, every one of them. I threw out tea, supplements, spice blends, anything I had not bought myself. For 3 nights, I slept with all the lights on. Then I stopped. Not because I felt safe, because I refused to let them keep that too. Celia helped me take emergency control properly. Tessa built internal maps of every compromised workflow. Bria became indispensable. Eddie, who had entered my life through a service alley and a ring box, stayed just long enough to point us toward what my father had missed, then tried to disappear again. I did not let him. I put him on retainer as an independent compliance consultant and doubled what he asked for. He looked personally offended by fair compensation. The hardest thing was not the work, it was memory. How many evenings had Graham watched me drink? How many times had he kissed my forehead after handing me the thing that blurred my thoughts? How many times had Micah sat across from me at Sunday dinner calling me sis while rerouting counterfeit medication through our name? There is no clean answer to questions like that. Betrayal is not content to happen once. It stains backward. A month after the arrests, I finally read Graham's jailhouse letter. 3 pages. Beautiful handwriting. No apology, only explanation. Pressure, market realities, structural desperation. He wrote as if he had fallen into corruption by leaning too hard on logic. As if poisoning me had been a regrettable tactic inside an otherwise serious argument. At the end he wrote, "I still believe if you had trusted me fully, none of this would have escalated." I tore the letter in half, then into quarters, then into pieces small enough to feel childish and satisfying at once. Micah did not write. Micah requested a meeting. Against advice, I agreed. Not in person. Video. Counsel present. He appeared on the screen in County Orange, looking somehow younger and meaner at the same time, as if jail had stripped away the corporate polish and left the original burn marks underneath. For several seconds he said nothing. Then, "You look like him." "My father?" "Yeah. That must hurt." His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "You always did that." "What?" "Cut where it matters." I waited. Finally he said, "He promised me if I worked hard enough, nobody would ever be able to send me back to being nothing." "And your conclusion from that was to become the kind of man who makes other people nothing?" His eyes flashed. "You had the blood. I had the labor. I had the target on my back. You had his last name. He gave you everything except permission to become him." Micah looked away for the first time. "Graham said you'd fold if he made you doubt yourself." That sentence landed so hard it almost made me dizzy. Not because it surprised me, because it proved the marriage had become an operating theory between them. "What did you tell him?" I asked. Micah gave a short laugh. "That you were stronger than he thought and softer than you should be." "Which part did you miscalculate?" He looked back. "The part where you stopped needing us to love you." I ended the call. That was the last time I saw his face. Winter thinned into spring. The wider investigation widened further. Not every institution had been compromised. Not every failed lot was theirs. But enough was theirs. Enough that prosecutors started speaking in numbers too large to fit inside normal human outrage. We rebranded portions of the company under an external monitoring program. I invited an independent ethics board in and gave them real power because I had learned exactly what decorative oversight is worth. We sold 3 non-essential divisions and invested the capital in chain of custody tech my father had wanted for years, but postponed because he believed trust could still substitute for verification inside family. It cannot. That lesson cost us plenty. The media wanted me to be either saint or fool. I was neither. I was a woman who had slept beside a crime and woken up late but not too late. That distinction matters more than pride ever will. In May, one of our hospital partners invited me to tour a pediatric oncology wing after replacement inventory stabilized. I almost said no. Then I went. A nurse introduced me to a little girl with a pink headscarf and a stuffed fox missing one eye. She held my hand with the authority of the very sick and asked if I was the medicine lady who stopped the bad boxes. I said, "Something like that." She nodded solemnly. "Good. My mom says bad people wear nice clothes." Out of the mouths of children. I sat in my car afterward and cried until I had no performance left in me. Not for Graham, not for Micah. For my father, who had died trying to shut the door before it spread. For the patients who would never know how close they came to someone else's greed. For myself, because surviving betrayal also means surviving the stupid shame of having loved where a weapon was being sharpened. 3 months after the arrests, the final personal twist arrived. Tessa found a storage unit leased under a shell tied indirectly to Graham. Inside were boxes of documents, cash, fake invoices, packaging stock, and one fireproof envelope labeled NK Mine. Inside were photocopies of my therapy records from after my mother died when I was 13. Notes about complicated grief, attachment, anxiety, fear of abandonment, my tendency to overfunction when relationships destabilized. Graham had acquired them somehow years ago and annotated certain margins in pencil. responds to reassurance when panicked. If challenged, delays conflict to preserve attachment. Most suggestible when exhausted and guilt activated. I sat there on an evidence room chair holding those pages, and felt something go so still inside me. It might have been peace, or it might have been the final death of illusion. He had not merely lied to me. He had profiled me. That discovery should have destroyed me. Instead, it clarified everything. He did not outsmart a foolish woman. He exploited a woman whose history he had studied like a manual. There is no shame in being manipulated by a specialist in manipulation. The shame belongs where the pencil marks are. When the criminal case formally opened to plea negotiations, both men tried to trade. Graham offered documents tying certain vendor executives to relabel fraud in exchange for leniency on poisoning-related counts. Micah offered route intelligence and names from the dispatch side. Neither could trade enough to make themselves good. That was not my decision. That was the law's. But I will not lie to you. I slept better once it became clear they were no longer choosing the shape of the story. The final board meeting before permanent restructuring took place in the same room where they had planned to remove me. Only this time the walls felt different. Truth changes air pressure. At the end of the meeting, after votes, signatures, and enough procedural language to anesthetize a horse, Howard Bale's replacement asked whether I wanted a commemorative portrait of my father rehung in the executive corridor outside the CEO suite. I said no. Everyone looked startled. Then I added, put him in operations, near dispatch. That's where he actually lived. So they did. The portrait hangs there now above a wall of real-time route maps and temperature controls. Not as a saint, as a warning and a standard. I still don't drink tea anyone hands me unless I watch it being made. I still wake sometimes at 2:00 a.m., convinced I forgot a lock, a code, a signature line. But I also know things now I didn't know when this began. I know love without scrutiny is not virtue. It is exposure. I know grief can make smart women look compliant while their enemies write diagnoses for them in advance. I know men who call you fragile often mean unguarded. And I know the deepest revenge is not screaming in a restaurant or collapsing beautifully at the moment of betrayal. The deepest revenge is surviving their version of you and becoming expensive to touch. A year later, on the anniversary of my father's death, I drove alone to the stretch of highway where the crash had happened. The median had been repaired. Traffic moved like nothing sacred had ever broken there, which is one of the rudest things about the world. It keeps going. I stood in the cold with my coat buttoned up to my throat and said out loud, I got there, Dad. Late, but I got there. No lightning, no sign, just wind. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Priya with a screenshot of our quarterly report. Clean audit, expanded hospital trust, no unresolved chain discrepancies. Under it she'd typed, he'd be proud. Also, Eddie says your route software still looks like it was designed by raccoons. I laughed hard enough for my breath to cloud. Then I went back to work. Because that is the thing nobody tells you about payoff. The truest one is not the arrest, not the handcuffs, not the look on a liar's face when the screen lights up. It is the morning after that. The one where the company still stands, the medicine arrives cold, the signatures are real, and the woman they tried to medicate into silence walks into her own building carrying nothing but keys. Tell me the exact moment you knew Graham was finished, and follow for more high-tension stories with real payoff.